Hello again. When I recorded the podcast about AI and the modern creative process that integrates both AI and designers, I underestimated the length of the recording. It just proved too long, more than 15 minutes. So I had to cut it into two halves. So in the first half, I mentioned typical issues that AI creates in the images it develops and the overall limitation. That is, AI is not an artist. It just tries to recreate the most probable visual patterns based on its training. So let's make no mistake. AI can save us an enormous amount of work hours when we work on the products. At the same time, it never develops what we call industrial grade products immediately. You always need the designer to use a rasp and finalize the image. And I have not even mentioned the copyright conundrum. Okay, designers who use AI in their modern creative process need to be very well aware of its limitations. I'm talking about two levels here. First of all, what I call the lower level vigilance includes looking at everything under the microscope, finding imperfections, illogical pieces, and so on, editing and fixing them. At the same time, there are high-level stumbling blocks when AI can only be used to create pieces, like building blocks, but the designer is fully responsible for creating the whole concept and finalizing the product and building it using those blocks. In the first part, I mentioned a couple of real-life cases that we encountered at Logrus IT. I'll just remind you that the first one dealt with creating a concept of a not very smart house where the original goal is kind of conflicting. And the other thing is creating conceptual art pieces illustrating the notion of security for a new cybersecurity product. In both cases, the designers could only use AI for creating building blocks and nothing more. The task is still too complex and sometimes too contradictory for AI. So now let's proceed with the second part that covers two topics. First of all, AI used for animations, and second, flat graphics, a very popular 2D form of visual art. And we'll start with animations, namely banners, animated banners, created based on static banners that I described in detail in the first part of this podcast. Now, let's talk a little bit about animation. In particular, with the example I showed you previously, we not only needed those static banners, but we needed to animate each of them. Well, first of all, obviously, you start with a static image, and the designer looks at them under the microscope, as I mentioned, selects the best one or fixes the errors, and then this one is used for animation. Animation is done typically using a different AI neural network because none of them do everything perfectly. And there is another very important thing here. We need to make sure that the static image that is going to be used for animation is perfect, because there is absolutely no way of fixing it down the line if we have an anatomical distortion or some other kind of a weird artifact there. With animation, we typically have to generate multiple versions and select the one that best fits the goal and the overall context. Okay, now I'll show you three different animations of one and the same static character, static picture, and I'll tell you about issues with each of these animations in advance so it was easier to figure out. Okay, let's look at the first one. Okay, this one was easy. This particular animation displays distorted, unnatural, excessive movements. Now the second one. It's more subtle. Let's look at it. And I'll tell you straight away, here is the clue. It's unnatural eye movement. Let's look at it and see whether you notice it. The third one that I'll show you, here it's on the screen, it seems right. Okay, in reality we have to make many more iterations than 3, but let's assume it's just 3 and the third one is perfect. Okay, here the designer, after selecting the animation, typically does at least 3 things. First of all, you remove redundant background. Second, you add some text and graphics. And finally, you change object positioning and animation speed. That's basically it. So let's now look at the final product after the designer. Here it is. It looks professional and it added all the necessary objects into the picture. The important thing, I need to reiterate this one, is that we used AI twice and human fixing, editing, correction also twice. First, we create static images using AI, the first neural network. Then the designer fixes whatever changes, whatever irregularities they found there, looking at them very attentively. Then we apply the second neural network in order to animate the whole thing, and then the designer fixes it again and finalizes it. In this case, the designer processes the animation, makes it look seamless, adds object and text, and prepares it for final publication. Next example, flat illustrations. Let me remind you what flat graphics are. This is a very popular minimalist two-dimensional digital art style that uses first simple shapes, second bold colors, and finally clear typography. Well, I should have produced something negative for you, because prior to that we talked about how people use AI created pieces or building blocks or anything, and then they edit and improve them. And here, regrettably, currently, when it comes to flat graphics, AI at the moment cannot provide either uniform style or clean lines in flat graphics. Namely, lines get distorted, style varies, and brand book requirements are very often violated. Why? The biggest issue is that at the moment, AI only creates raster images. While working with flat graphics, designers typically use vector graphics. That provides much cleaner lines and is also much easier to edit and fix. If you look at what AI can create in the area of flat graphics, here we have an example. Look at this picture provided by AI. Distorted proportions, distorted geometry, fuzzy lines and edges, and finally some characters are simply reused, some images are reused, which is not great. Here is the picture, a flat graphic created by the designer. It's tidy, it's precise, it has a uniform style, and it's very easy to edit because it uses vector graphics. Okay, I sincerely hope that this podcast has illustrated some real AI use cases as well as its limitations. I also hope, for the time being, that you've been persuaded that human designers and content editors and other creative specialists in general are still essential when we need to create professional level art, graphics, or animations. Thank you very much.